busy, but like not like I imagine you were super busy.
Yeah, I mean, I try to book. Like, I actually started scheduling meetings with like other devs so that I could fit them into my
Yeah.
calendar, so that I could actually make sure to like pick their brains on stuff that they're doing that I think applies to me, or like they're just my friends and I haven't seen them and I want to see their games or
Yeah.
whatever. Which is
We'll come back to that right away. Consider mics are hot. We're going to be live like within a minute.
oh cool.
So yeah, this is great. So yeah, we're gonna. This is pegged to GDC, so we're gonna talk about that, what that is, what makes it different from other live, other conferences. Like most people are familiar with. Many people are familiar with E3. Maybe not everyone as much with GDC. So
Yep.
we're gonna go with that. So we are apparently live now. So hello, Facebook and YouTubers. My name is Jonathan Ore. I'm the entertainment online writer, specializing in video games, I suppose. I'm joined with Joel Burgess of Ubisoft Toronto and Nathan Vella of Capy Games. So two cool dudes from two cool studios. We're talking about video games. So they just came back from the Games Developers Conference in San Francisco last week. So we're going to just kind of get a debriefing on what happened there and get a sense of, what's going on in games, maybe some forward-looking to interesting trends. Send us your questions and comments, and we'll hopefully shed some light on what it means to make video games from the other side of the console. So yeah.
I like other side of the console.
That
works for me.
I'm not sure.
That works for me. Let's
Okay,
ship that.
Yeah.
cool. Like behind the piano. I don't know.
Stick with your first instinct.
Sure, I think this is good. So yeah, send us your questions, comments, and then we're gonna roll with it. So first of all, you just got back from the Game Developer Conference in San Francisco. So yeah, Joel, can you just give me a quick rundown? What is GDC?
Yeah, so I mean GDC's summer camp for game developers, right? Like it's the one show that feels like it's really about game dev. It's not it's not necessarily about consumers and players. It's not necessarily about like business so much. It's like really like game developers get to come together, talk about the stuff that affects their jobs, what's interesting to them, like what is scary to them, and then just like hang out. Like it's like this nice sort of punched in week where you get to see all like your game industry friends and figure out what they're thinking about, and then go home and like be super reinvigorated and inspired to work.
What's scary about games? That's fascinating.
There's a lot of talk.
There's-
There's a lot of like venting and shoulder crying in
Sure.
GDC because it's hard to make video games sometimes.
Yeah. So Nathan Vella, what was scariest about games for you this year?
All of it. No, I mean it's super exciting to be a game developer right now. There is a lot of consoles. There are new platforms. There are technologies that are still being wrangled.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's really tough to sell games. It's really tough to have your games be discovered.
Yeah.
From the hundreds of millions of dollars of AAA games all the way down to small games being developed by a single person. It's getting your game in front of fans is tough as heck, and a huge part of GDC is trying to find ways to surface your games, to get them in front of players, to get players excited about something that they actually would be excited about if they actually knew that it even existed, or if they knew what it was in the first place.
Yeah, this dovetails great with our first question. Cheryl Shiji asked, "What's new with games?" So I guess we already have your piece, Nathan. Joel, what's new at Ubisoft? What's new with you? What are you looking for, or what are you looking forward to in the industry right now?
I mean, the best thing about the industry right now, I mean, I feel like it's kind of what you're saying is like there are just so many ways to make games and so many types of games to enjoy. And like, yeah, it's totally scary as a dev because there are so many games and so many types of games that like are competing for eyeballs. But as a creator and as a fan, like from a purely creative standpoint, it's an awesome time because like I kind of don't know, right?
Yeah.
Like in 2 years, I don't know what's going to be prevalent. Like what kinds of games, what's exciting to people, and it feels more in the past that we're less trend driven than we used to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like there are many vectors on which like if you're interested in open world games, if you're interested in small like artistic personal projects, if you're interested in like esports and competitive stuff, like the future is bright like for all of those areas, and it's almost like just overwhelming.
Cool.
And at a certain point, you got to mention VR, AR, because that's like the big. I mean, GDC this year had its first kind of like big VR track.
Yeah.
Microsoft showed some headsets, I think.
The HoloLens stuff.
Yeah, and regular VR. There was a lot of talk about from all of different like Oculus cutting prices right before GDC. like NVIDIA showing newer, faster video cards that are essentially also meant to make VR better. So I mean, that you can't avoid it, right? It's VR talk at in-game circles is like it's the thing that keeps popping up.
Yeah. Speaking of new trends, let's pull it back to like tried and trues. Tristan asked, "What's your opinion on the Halo series, and it's continuing to put out games? Should they quit while ahead, or stop and leave a legacy?" Nathan, you were talking earlier about how like the fourth of anything in a franchise tends to be its worst, or like what happens when a franchise loses steam, or like what's the impetus to continue making games in like tried and true series when, as we're talking, there's so much innovation and new ideas going on.
I think that a lot of those decisions aren't necessarily made by creatives, but they are driven by creatives. So as long as somebody has a good idea for a cool new Halo game, I will play a cool new Halo game. But if the decisions are being made purely from the like, let's spin the franchise as far as it can go until no one wants to play it, that's going to push people pretty far, and I think it leaves a lot of empty space for cool new ideas. I personally like. Halo was one of those like mind-altering things when I played it the first time. Like I couldn't even understand how they made something that only let you carry 2 weapons and had no health essentially. And I think that affected games going forward. I would love to see them go back and try to do that type of innovation in console first-person shooter again. And I think they have the people that could do it. 343 is an amazing team of developers. So as long as it's not being pushed down from like, well, there's more money to be made. I think there's creative people at 343 that are going to push it super hard. And you get to see Halo Wars 2, and you get to see, like, I'm a huge fan of taking video game IP, video game brands, and not resting on your laurels, of spreading it out, of like seeing what other studios could do with this. Like we did an expansion for Don't Starve, which has, millions and millions of players, and basically had Clay, the studio in Vancouver that made it, hand us Don't Starve and be like, what do you want to make with this? I think more studios should do that, and I think Halo Wars is kind of the start of that on the big brand side. So
yeah,
I could blabber about Halo for another like 6 hours though, by the way. So I'll shut up.
That sounds like another 6-hour stream. That sounds perfect. That's going to be our extra live stream.
Yeah.
So there are some comments coming from the stream that it is International Women's Day. They're asking like, why didn't we have a female dev on the panel, which is a totally fair question. We've been working on this panel for a few weeks before GDC, so I mean that's just kind of how things. How things kind of shook down, but yeah, fair point. I was writing a story about how like with Horizon Zero Dawn there are more female characters leading, and there are a lot of female devs who are behind really cool games and projects. This is a nice, hopefully a good segue to the GDC Awards. The Independent Games Festival Awards were hosted by game developer Nina Freeman.
She kicked butt.
Yeah. So I mean, any thoughts on that? Where are we as far as like game dev and gender diversity and diversity as of all kinds behind the scenes?
Not far enough.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the two white guys from video games talking about diversity in video games automatically makes almost everything we can say moot. But I mean, I think it is definitely worth pointing out that I think both Ubisoft and Capy are super committed to that.
Yeah.
But there's like 25 million things more that we all should be doing, that the industry should be doing, and I think there are people in high places thinking very strongly about ways to make things better. I just hope that it trickles down to, the whole industry.
Yeah.
I would definitely, I'd like to add that on International Women's Day, if Mayor Shepard's watching, Mayor is like the whole reason why Capy exists, or one of the main reasons why Capy exists. If her and Reagan hadn't made video games, we probably wouldn't be making video games.
Yeah,
so
Mayor Shepard, co-designer and co-creator of the N+ series, some fantastic platforming design made in Toronto. Joel, any questions? Ubisoft Toronto, like part of the Nexus was Jade Raymond, and it's certainly a topic, and certainly with Ubisoft, the question is like, or a studio as large as Ubisoft, we talk about a lot of things, but like, what does one do to truly promote and forward or advance diversity in making games and the audience that play them, I suppose.
I mean, as a white dude talking about making games on International Women's Day, like, I'm always cautious not to try and like speak for underrepresented groups, and I think what you can do is use the platforms that we have and to signal boost and to give opportunities for other groups to speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm part of the level design workshop at GDC, and we had 50% speakers that were female. The studio leadership at Ubisoft Toronto is 50% female. And I think as we find ways to lift up and give a place for more people to influence and really be present and be members of this whole industry and this whole community, things will continue moving in the right direction. But we do have to reach out of our comfort zone and force that equalization to happen. It's not going to be something that can happen passively.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. This is great talk. Switching gears a little bit, Steve Hillian asks specifically for Ubisoft. Ubisoft's got a lot of projects going on, a lot of games that are still going on. So he's asking anything to look forward to on the horizon for The Division and Ghost Recon Wildlands, the latter of which just launched. And of course he asks, what's up with the new Assassin's Creed? I'm assuming there's a new Assassin's Creed.
And Joe will be revealing that right now.
Yeah. Breaking news.
All right. Okay.
The PR guy is staring very intently right now.
It's actually laughing. That's
Yeah.
the best
Yes.
part.
No, I mean, okay. I'm sure there are great things coming in all of those brands, but that's not my area. I actually I'm so busy working on my project, which is an unannounced project that I'm new at Ubisoft too.
Yeah.
Right.
I should mention Joel is, I believe your title now is World Director,
Yes,
which is quite a cool title.
That's way cooler than my title.
And he's formerly of Bethesda
Game Studios,
worked on Elder Scrolls and Fallout, which is some really fascinating world building in those games as well. So I mean, just very quickly, what does it mean to be a world director?
Still figuring it out.
Okay.
But I mean, it's such a sort of ridiculously grandiose title.
That's why I love it.
Yeah,
Keep it.
I mean, so the title is kind of a symbol, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ubi is really interested in shaking up their own approach, to open world games and to finding out what open world games can be from this point forward, because there's so much interest in this. And at once there's so much going into open world games, but we're also sort of funneling towards a couple archetypes of what open world games can be. And one of the things that and I love the team that I used to work with at Bethesda, and one of the things I think we were good at is not looking too hard at what other people were doing and thinking about what is our project about, what are the themes, and how do we make it meaningful for people to experience.
I feel like there's a challenge now as games get bigger and the tech behind them get more sophisticated. There's been a push more to GTA was great. Let's make a giant game. Let's make a giant game with a giant city. So we got Watch Dogs, and Ghost Recon is also an open world game. And never mind, Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, which is a mind-blowingly giant game. I mean, is there more pressure to move towards that kind of format?
I mean, scope is a super confusing thing, right?
Yeah.
When your games get larger, it gets harder to know what your game's about and to focus things back towards that. And I do view that as kind of part of my job. My job isn't necessarily to think exclusively about narrative or art or game mechanics or I'm kind of running between a bunch of different areas and saying, okay, what are our narrative themes and what do we want the player to be doing on a moment-to-moment basis, and what's the identity of individual locations in the world and the backstory, and trying to help us maintain a focus on what our game is actually trying to say and what it's about. Because when you have a lot of resources and a lot of scope and pressure to well, this guy's doing this and this game's doing that, to sort of lose your identity as a game. So I think that the challenge, right, is maintaining a focus and knowing what your game's about, and just messaging that back to the player and reinforcing it through her experience.
So this is kind of an open question. Brandon asks quite simply, why do you make games? So I'll start with you, Nathan. What got you into games? Why did you want to make games as opposed to play them?
Yeah, it's a fairly typical story in one way, in that I played them growing up. I remember playing Eric Chahi's Another World and being oh, video games aren't just toys for little kids. They're also artistic and big and intense, and that kind of spiraled out of control. And I spent a lot of time as a child just kind of drawing on grid paper and making Final Fantasy maps and all that dumb stuff.
Yeah. Hey, it ain't dumb. I did that with I have an entire design document for my idea of Sonic 4 circa 1998. So yeah.
So yeah, I really loved that side of it, but when I was growing up, there was no such thing as going into video games as a career path.
Yeah.
So I went to film school and taught myself how to do post-production and edited Canadian TV for a while, and it kind of came end around. A whole bunch of the people that I started the studio with were also in my class, and we all didn't like our jobs and thought it would be way cooler to make video games. So we rented a car and drove from Toronto to San Jose, where the Game Developers Conference used to be, 55 hours straight, so that we could meet people in the industry and decide if it was actually cool, because people in the TV industry, from my experience as a contractor, was pretty negative. And then I ended up in like hour-long conversations with one of the art directors from GTA 3, and like I was literally no one and knew nothing, and people took their time and spoke to me and offered, encouragement to make stuff. And so we started our own studio, because actually at the time there was no game development studios in Toronto, really. Boy, how those times change.
Yeah, Toronto's quite a nexus for games right now. Joel, Ubisoft Toronto is kind of in certain ways is that at the center of it, with this, the giant studio that has been growing over the last few years. So yeah, how did you get into games? Why did you want to get into the game development scene?
I mean, yeah, like Nathan was saying, I sort of didn't know there was one, right?
Yeah.
And to an extent there wasn't. Like, I really distinctly remember the first time, like, I saw an Atari stick move and a thing move on screen, and that was like fundamentally fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Just like technologically, right? Like at that time, there's nothing like that, and so I was sort of interested in games, but wasn't super exposed. I never had a console in the house or anything like that. And it was actually like Daggerfall for me was a game where I was like, oh, like games can be this other thing, right? Like this sort of more expansive exploratory thing. So I started paying more attention to the games after that, and like got into modding and doing a little bit of code and making stuff. And I'm just the right age where there was like sort of a fledgling path towards games career once you became aware of it, and ended up going to University of Central Florida in Orlando, which had like this brand new digital media program, which is sort of like underwater basket weaving, like, it's a film school class here and like a web programming class here and like a couple of game specific classes.
Underwater basket weaving.
Oh, have you never heard
I've
that?
never heard that. I'm immediately trying to visualize like making a game out of that, and then okay, sorry, that was a tangent.
Sorry to send you down that rabbit hole.
God,
it's a figure of speech for like a lib arts, like
that's cool.
Make your own major. But yeah, so it was like this brand new major. It's sort of figuring itself out, and like I kind of got lucky. Like I applied to a bunch of places, like just had an awful portfolio. If you're really clever, you can find my bad work online still. And
cool. Such as
or just like a really badly rigged like woodpecker like on a flight loop. It's like, but I got hired through like a clerical error, right? Like there was a studio that like misread my resume and thought I was like this plug-in programmer that did a bunch of stuff for like Maya and 3 Studio Max, which is not true at all.
Okay.
And like called me and interviewed me, and like we never realized the misunderstanding until like I showed up for work.
Oh really?
Yeah,
that's always fun.
Yeah, no, it's great. Like it's fantastic.
So you're the new cook, right? Or
yeah.
Or the new if I were walking, it's like, oh yeah, you're the new cameraman. It's like, no, I am not. So
yeah, we sorted it up pretty quickly.
Yeah. We mentioned that like when you kind of started getting into this, there really wasn't a system or like an infrastructure for that. But now, at least in Toronto and Canada, there are a lot of new programs. Like there is an education path for getting into game dev right now. So like, what does that look like now to you, Nathan?
I mean, when we hire, we don't look at that. We just look at what, like, we want to know who you are as a human and what have you made before. And that to me, that's the path to games now is starting to make your own path, starting to develop your own stuff. And you can do that through education. I'm not crapping on education at all. I think there's some really strong programs. But to me, the important piece of that puzzle is, how do I demonstrate to the industry that I understand the industry, that I understand how to create, how to communicate with the team, how to finish stuff in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely anything that provides you an opportunity to teach yourself how to do things your own way, and education is perfect for that, right? It's 4 years or 3 years of time with lower obligations, some focus. So I think that's an amazing opportunity to make your own games, not class-based, not games that you're doing because a teacher told you have to do them, but learning the aspects of game design, the messages that you want to share, the atmosphere, the tone, or any of those pieces of it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty amazing that you can go to school for video games now and get a degree in video games. I mean, that's would have blew my mind if I was 18 again.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think right now, Twine for me is like the symbol, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
So for those who don't know, Twine is like a very simple tool to make your own sort of text-based, choose your own adventure structure type of games.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of like students or hopeful or people just curious about the industry who like will approach me and like, like I want to make games, but I can't quite figure out, like I don't know how to code or I can't find a team to work with, particularly people who are like, like writers, or it's like, there's no excuse. Like, grab Twine.
Yep.
Start working in it right now. Like, if you're a little more technical, grab Unity, grab Unreal. Like,
Game Maker, yeah.
Yeah, Game Maker is awesome.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of tools out there,
and I think like a lot of them are free nowadays, right?
Yeah, or especially for people who are making non-commercial stuff, like
totally
might as well.
Yeah, that's one of the best things Unity did, was have the non-commercial license.
Yeah,
so
same, and Unreal moved there too. I mean, Unreal is, you can download 100% of the source code of Unreal, and if you just want to make stuff with it, you don't want to ship it, don't ship it. If you ship stuff, they have a path for how to pay the licensing. It's really smart, and I think the whole democratization of game development platforms leads back to diversity, which we were talking about earlier. The easier it is for anyone to share their kind of perspective on what games should be made by actually making them, the better we are as an industry.
Yeah, I mean, like Christine Love, who's a Toronto-based game developer, the games she makes like would have been impossible to at least fund and go get a team to create, or would have been much more difficult, like even 10 years ago, much less 15 or 20 years ago.
Heck. And IGF award winner.
Toronto-based Christine Love, her latest game, Lady Killer in a Bind, won excellence in narrative at the IGF, and it was a pretty cool event.
I love seeing Toronto devs getting awards for cool video games.
So, pivoting to the exact opposite of free game making, we have a question about VR. So Justin asks, is VR going to the way of the 3D television? Who's going to pay $800 to play like strange tech demos and like maybe Resident Evil 7? So you guys were at GDC. VR was there. It's been around for a little while now, but it still seems like very much first adopter, or it's first generation. People are dipping their toes. It's still like $800 for the PlayStation VR is more than that for the Vive or Oculus. Where do you see VR coming from a dev side, VR going from a dev point of view? I'll start with Joel.
Yeah, I mean, like just speaking of it in terms of GDC, like, like I was maybe a little bit like dour or cynical about like going into GDC. I was like, this year might be kind of a downer, and like there's a lot of VR projects that haven't come home to roost, and like other things, and in almost every category where I expected GDC to be like bleak, it wasn't. Like VR was like, I didn't think it was possible for it to be more present this year than like E3 and GDC have passed, but like the floor was full
everywhere.
Yeah, like middleware and vendors and hardware, and like there's a lot of just like straight up money going in, but there are also a lot of interesting creators. Like Nathan mentioned, there was a VR track for GDC this year. So there are a lot of speakers talking about interesting things they're doing. And if you just hop on like the Vive store or something and you look at what's there, you have games that are trying to be like traditional, typical game experiences, and you have things that are much more experimental. Yeah. So it's like an interesting space right now, and I think a lot of people are investing in VR and comfortable operating at a loss on it. Because like this first generation of VR, like it's got the early adopter problems, and it's going to be tough for people to get into, and there's like a limited market. But as hardware makers are able to drive the price point down and keep like interesting content makers engaged, like as long as both of those vectors stay on course, I think we are going to see VR as a lasting presence. It's just these next 2 or 3 years are going to be critical.
Okay, yeah, so Nathan, what do you see? Yeah, what do you see in the next 2 or 3 years?
I mean, I'm not. I really enjoy playing the tech demos and playing the games, like the job simulators and the fantastic contraptions. Those are really like unique, enjoyable experiences. Period. There's no kind of like, but they're VR. But no, like they're really fun and enjoyable, and that's just kind of one direction that it can go. I don't know if you played Robo Recall or the tech demo for Robo Recall that was called Bullet Train or something like that.
Okay.
Epic's VR game. It's been. I mean, it's. I doubt VR a lot less after seeing that.
Yeah.
Just because it is much more of a full, like it is a traditional video game done through a VR pipeline, where traditional games don't break it down. Like it's pure VR. It makes total sense in VR. I can't imagine playing it any other way.
Yeah.
And it's magical. I think there's too much. there's too far to go for VR to go away, right?
Okay.
That people see where it can go. They see the idea of like getting rid of the cords, the idea of like putting the computers in the headsets. They see the idea of, you know, minimizing the headset weight and increasing tracking. And once all of this stuff happens, maybe it becomes less likely that people get sick or feel queasy.
Yeah.
All of these things are going to happen, right? They're big engineering problems, but there's enough money and interest and challenge there that they will get solved.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't see VR going the way of the dodo. I don't see it becoming 3D TV, because 3D TV is kind of like, to me, like it's like TV Plus.
Okay.
It's like a platform that already exists. Here's a little twist on it.
Yeah.
VR is a new platform. VR is not the same as playing a video game in front of a TV on a console or playing it on your mobile device. It's so unique and so inherently different, fundamentally different, that new platform needs a chance to grow. And I even think it's longer. I think it's a far way away from when it's going to hit that kind of peak before we see the Magic Leaps and the HoloLenses taking AR, before we see Oculus and Vive and whoever else is going to be, Google, playing in the VR space. It's going to take them a while to figure out how to, like Joe said, drive the price point down and make it so that average people who don't even really know that much about technology can get interested.
Yeah.
But there are cool video games being made, and the creative challenge, and we talk about it in the studio. We're just talking about it in the studio, but like right now, like there is no big financial reason to invest in VR, right? There's not enough people to buy enough games that make it super profitable. Mm-hmm. But there are creative and technological reasons to be interested in VR. And while for me as a person running a studio, I'm like, but not necessarily the best business decision. But in the end, the creatives at the studio and the programmers at the studio are they're hype about it, and so that means that you're going to see cool stuff continue.
So VR to stay, VR to grow, perhaps. Speaking of new hardware or new and growing hardware, of course, last week was the launch of Nintendo's new system, the Switch. On YouTube user Cow Country asks, "What are your thoughts on the new Switch? I'm still on the fence if I should pick one up." So what are your thoughts? So the Nintendo Switch, we did a live stream about it last week. It's a portable tablet. You can also hook it up to your TV rather seamlessly. From a dev side, what's the Switch like? What's it like seeing a new console, a new platform, something new to develop for, perhaps? I'm going to go with Joel.
I mean, I'm just looking at the Switch as a player. Yeah, sure. And I guess kind of riding it easy and like, I'll see about this thing. And I got totally swept. Like, basically when I landed in San Francisco, I was like, all right, it's out on Friday. I'm actually kind of like jazzed about it. I was like, I'm just gonna roll by like a GameStop at midnight. I'll be out late on Thursday anyway, and like I just grab one when I'm in the States, and like hundreds of people lined up. I'm like, that's cool. I'm all right. And then like I started like reading about Zelda, and like I got back home, and I spent Saturday in a Etobicoke, like just searching for a Switch hard. Yeah. So I'm super ready to jump in on that. I love that Nintendo's like still always looking for a new like.
It's so weird. It's so weird, but like that's Nintendo, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm a huge handheld. Like I love my Vita. Mm-hmm. My Vita is one of my favorite video game platforms. I play it all the time still, and the Switch is a Nintendo version of that in a lot of ways, right? Yeah. It's got a nice little touch screen. It's high res, like 720p on a small screen is a-okay by me. I don't need any more than that.
We're probably going to see like a lot of indie games that had a home on the Vita move to the Switch, in my like very vague projections.
Yeah, it depends how interested Nintendo is in that. Overall, I think it's I love seeing Nintendo disrupting the handheld space in a weird way. Like it's a very strange play, and every time Nintendo does strange stuff, everybody's like, oh, what's Nintendo doing? Like I don't get, and then a whole bunch of people buy it, creates their own little niche. And I mean, any Nintendo could launch a toaster oven, and if it plays a new Zelda, everybody will buy that toaster oven, even though they have their own full-size oven. It is a very strong sell to have like what many people are calling the best Zelda game ever, one of the best video games ever, as your like one launch title. Everybody's going to buy it, and everybody's going to buy Zelda. They have us hardcores that grew up with Nintendo, that grew up with Zelda. Where everybody's in Joel's case, right? Everybody's like, I don't know, I'm not too sure about it. Then they see Zelda scores, they see more Zelda scores, and then you're screwed. You're driving around in Etobicoke. You don't want to be driving around in Etobicoke on a Saturday. I would much rather. But I'm sure you were one of like thousands of people who were in the same case.
Nintendo did announce yesterday that the Switch was their best launch ever to date, which means a lot of things. They didn't necessarily give all like the concrete numbers, but like my estimation is that they prepared for this launch more than say the Wii or the Wii U, because for the last two systems it was out of stock everywhere. But at the very least, they seem to have produced and shipped enough units to meet the initial demand, enough to, I guess, make that press release.
Yeah, I think they did. I mean, I think it was an interesting launch for them. I think they've had some hardware challenges right off the bat.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think might affect their kind of second round of purchasers.
Yeah, this holiday. I'm curious.
Yeah, but then they're going to put out Mario Odyssey. They're going to put out Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. They're going to put out ARMS. Like, all of the Splatoon fans are just going to get in on ARMS. I don't know. I think they have a first party path, and that's what Nintendo does best. Nintendo is, they win their own game because they create machines that play their own games. Yeah. And Ubisoft's traditionally been a huge supporter of new Nintendo platforms. They've always been one of the bigger kind of like Wii U launches had huge amounts of Ubisoft games. Mm-hmm. This time, I mean, there's not really that many games in general on the Switch. But again, it doesn't matter. I think it's a fantastic device. Yeah. I think it's really cool and unique, and it's silly, right? The controllers come off. Like, why? Yeah. I don't know.
Like,
I don't really get it.
You
but
put
I don't
them together and then you put them on the screen. What is going on?
Yeah,
right?
It's super cool. As long as it doesn't scratch your screen, that's my only kind of like. Yeah. Now I'm like, I baby it. Like, I don't put it in the dock like super carefully because I'm afraid of those screen scratches. But
yeah. Well, I mean, they do have that carrying case that looks like a Zelda Sheikah Slate, which is cool. So
I don't need that. Don't make me buy that.
Okay, so we do have a few more questions about game dev and like how to get into game dev. I had a question here, and then my phone is scrolling around. I guess we're asked. Like, there's some questions. Josh asks, what would be the best source for a person just beginning to learn how to code? Perhaps like if they want to get into game dev, like where does one start? We touched on this before, but
yeah, I mean, if you're learning just specifically like the code side of it, like I actually do think that's where school does help. Like comp sci programs and software engineering programs are the best way to learn if you want to be a technical programmer. Yeah. If you want to learn to code just to make games for yourself, then I've personally found that there is an unending resource of Unity, GameMaker, Construct, any middleware you want to use. There is an unending stream of tutorials on the internet, and an unending stream of support on message boards and forums. I mean, whether it's Unity's own forums or something like if you want to make small independent games, like TigSource is a great. So many people start their making their first games by starting to do it and then posting about it on TigSource on the independent side.
And one thing I'll say too, for somebody who's specifically interested in being a coder, like there'll be the temptation and people around them might be like, oh, like C++ only, or go grab the Doom 3 source code and compile that and like emphatically don't, right?
Okay.
Like grab, like Unity I think is the best place right now. C# is in fact a programming language. Don't listen to the people who say it's like not. Like, okay. There's a weird sort of pretension about like C#. Like if you're learning how games work and you want to learn the technical and how code, like even if your goal is to be like a Carmack level like rendering programmer who needs to understand like the low level hardware stuff.
John Carmack.
Yeah.
Just for those.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. It's like.
Yeah, of course. Right.
But like even if that's your goal, I still think there's real value in learning how to do like C# and Unity is really good about modularizing. Like this is the game programming problem I'm fixing right now.
Okay.
And it might be optimizing how this like module works, or like I want to author a component that lets an artist like mess with shaders. You're gonna learn a lot in like a more focused way about how games actually work. Mm-hmm. And then when you understand that, I think it's gonna be easier to make the leap to like fundamental like C++ level like hardcore programming.
Okay. Related to that, Long Feng asks specifically about college programs or university programs. Are you on the keep about what? On the keep? That's not the right term. What programs might be good if you want to get into like the education side of making games? So I know there's some programs in Toronto. Any?
Well, yeah, like George Brown has some,
Yeah.
Sheridan has some, Seneca has some. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's pretty hard to find a college in Ontario or in Canada in general that doesn't run some kind of program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think but it kind of depends what you want to do, right?
Yeah, of course.
Like if some people want to just make games, and I think those programs have an advantage there in that they're going to give you a little bit of everything. They're going to kind of prepare you for the like different aspects of it. If you want to be a programmer, there is definitely different places to go. If you want to be an artist, there are different places to go. To me, all that matters is that while people are doing it, they spend their time to teach themselves, to learn themselves, and to create for themselves rather than for just the purposes of getting a grade in a class.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I'd add to that too. Like, even though I was kind of making fun of my major program earlier, the fact that I didn't really have the option to go to like a hardcore just games curriculum has actually like benefited me in ways that I didn't expect. Like little things that I learned in film class or little things that I learned in like web design classes and stuff like that. It's actually come back and helped me. So even if you're in a situation, if you're in an area or your scholarship opportunities don't allow you to go to a games program, don't be afraid to enroll in a traditional program. And like Nathan said, like you're going to be judged when you enter the industry on the stuff you made yourself anyway. So even if you're going to a capital G game dev program, everyone will tell you like work on your personal projects, put your own flair on, like don't use the template portfolio the college gives you that looks like the other 30 people in your program. Like so that wisdom will apply whether you're in a game dev program or you're in like just a local community college or whatever the case may be. So like learn how to make games yourself and find the value out of the education that you have access to.
Okay.
There's like of the 24 people in the studio, I think maybe 2 went to game dev, 3 went to game dev programs. I was a film student. A bunch of my co-founders were film students or biochemical engineers, or like I do think there is because there is the path to making your own stuff. It provides opportunities for anybody who is studying anything as long as you're interested in learning.
Totally. We have a few questions about. I guess maybe this could dovetail on like some of the coverage we've had on empathy games in the last couple of weeks. John asks, will games ever move away from military or war games for nicer, kinder ones? Lee asks that we're tired of games with shooting or killing. What's the market like right now for games? 'Cause often, especially in the mainstream news, first-person shooters and GTA, they tend to make the headlines. What else is out there these days as far as like games for like a wider audience? Joel, Ubisoft makes a huge swath of different games. So
Steep.
Yeah. There are games like Steep for sure that don't rely on traditional like shooting and violence game mechanics.
Yeah.
I mean, games have gotten really good at modeling violence.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's.
Why is that? What about like when you build a game? What is it about violence that works, or is it just that it was the first thing we figured out?
No, I think there's like a learned reflex.
Yeah.
Right. Like we've been making games that are kind of like early games are often about like slapstick action reaction, and the mechanics of that, like shooting or hitting people and having a reaction, telegraphing that. Like we have a very sophisticated language for talking about that. But I think that we've already started to not necessarily move away from, but create space for games that aren't about that. I mean, like if you're plugged into games like enough to be like watching this broadcast, like about Flower and Journey, right?
Yeah.
You know about games like Gone Home. Like this is part of the conversation. And I think what I feel is like kind of embedded in that question is those types of games making the leap to bigger budget, like big AAA.
Like how visible are they when people walk into like an EB Games,
Yeah, I mean, Minecraft, Terraria, Stardew Valley, like those have transcended from indie games into mass mainstream. And I think that will continue to happen with even weirder games. Stardew Valley is a really strange video game to blow up that size. It's amazing, and I can understand why, but it's strange to see that happen. I think there's a massive amount of space to get away from the kind of traditional violence, traditional kind of shooter style, but at the same time, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with having that type of game as part of the industry either. Okay. I mean, if that was the only thing that was selling and there was no examples of anybody buying games other than like Shooty Bang Bang 5 and the 17 different versions of that game, that would be problematic. But I think as the industry has progressed, as independent games have risen, Journey is a phenomenal example. I mean, that is a multi-million unit selling game that has like the least to do with other multi-million unit selling games that you can imagine. The space is there, and for fans that are shopping online, like if you go into GameStop, you will see a lot of the same stuff. Because the same people have owned those shelves for the longest time. But if you go to Steam, PSN, Xbox Live, the eShop on Switch, App Store, you will be hard pressed not to find games that are like about things other than shooting. There are so many of them, and so many of them are pretty darn popular at this time too.
Cool. So we have about 5 minutes left before the news kicks us out of the studio. So one last question, which is a fun one. It's a bit of a doozy. Cameron asks, do you guys foresee games being accepted as pieces of art? He mentioned specifically it's a reaction to games like The Witcher 3 and Hideo Kojima's work especially. So yeah, this is a fun one that we haven't talked about ever before. Our games art, where are we in that conversation? Joel?
Conversation's over, man.
Okay.
Like I don't know. Like this is a super easy and kind of fun argument to have with people who have the opposite opinion, but I feel like we crossed that threshold. Like we're done.
Okay.
I mean, if you're looking for traditional just like acknowledgement, like I've stood in the Smithsonian and looked at my work, right? Like I've had that experience. And if you're more interested in like the low level definition of art and what it means to people, like games have been affecting to people. Like I've had the privilege to work on games that have affected people, and to have people like come out to the studio, you know, as part of charity events or just like private things that we do to be like to reach out to people in the community who are suffering, and like hearing people tell us how the work that we've done helped them get through a dark time, or help them look at the world differently, or help them learn lessons. Like for me, that's all the acknowledgement that I ever needed to say that games are in fact art. I mean, if we're looking for like mainstream recognition of games of art, I think, you know, look at the way the games are talked about in the media 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and the way the games are starting to be like acknowledged and talked about in the media now. It's changing. And it, you know, I talked about learned reflex a few minutes ago. I think there is like, we're used to talking about games in a certain framework that's been like modeled and informed by things like when the only news piece you would see about games was like GTA 3 and like the worst thing in GTA 3, like
or a boob in Mass Effect.
Yeah, like that stuff.
Alien boobs.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the other side of that question is like, there is like the high arts, the fine arts, and that's what people seem to be worried a lot about. To me, culture is more interesting than art in a lot of ways, and how culture is kind of defined by not capital A fine art, but more about the creators, the reasons behind their creations, and how it like moves people to like form around these things, about how people kind of develop an affinity to a certain piece of culture or a certain type of culture, and then create like snowball that culture into something bigger. Games culture is the single largest force kind of in entertainment, in creativity right now. It's to me, that's like almost like way more important than whether or not we get recognized as art, because I totally agree. I think Joel's absolutely right. All of the ways that you can categorize art, we've checked those boxes. We just haven't received a report card from the world yet. That's the only thing we're waiting for. But on the culture side, like our art form has fundamentally changed every aspect of like interaction, of entertainment, of how people consume things. I mean, people often forget that like so many of the like online business models were pioneered by game developers. Like it's all of that cultural component. And we've also kind of created a cool subcultures and kind of ultra niche cultures that never would have existed, and that are some of the most like strong, supportive, and interesting cultures that the world's ever seen. Cool. So that's, you know, art, yes, but also culture too, which I think is magic.
So I think that's a really good place to wrap. This has been really fun. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of our viewers on Facebook and YouTube for sending their really awesome questions. So again, Nathan Vella from Capy and Joel Burgess from Ubisoft Toronto. This has been a lot of fun. So yeah, having fun chat about video games. So thanks to you two.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
And thanks for watching Internets.
Thanks, Internet. Again.
So yeah, thank you, and have a good day, everyone. Cool.